I was lying in bed, covered by the old wool blanket Margaret used to warm her feet with, when I heard the study door click shut. My stepson's voice followed, low, even, the kind of voice people use when they think the person in the next room can't hear them. "He's not tracking anymore," Daniel said. "You can see it too, right? We need to take over before he does something irreversible." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just let my breathing stay steady, the way I used to during thunderstorms when I wanted to calm the dog. Because if they believed I wasn't listening, they might finally say what they meant. The lawyer, Richard, hesitated. "Legally, he still holds full capacity. But if you're seeing signs," Daniel interrupted, like he'd been preparing for this moment. "I've already started consolidating accounts. He doesn't even notice." That's when I knew. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. And I wasn't going to let it happen. Not quietly. Not this time. But that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It started quietly, like most things do. It started the day after Margaret died. The house fell silent in a way I couldn't name. Not just because she was gone, but because something about the center of the home had vanished. The kitchen, the hallway, even the dust in the corners. Everything felt still, like it was waiting for her to return. Daniel showed up early that next morning. He didn't knock, just walked in with a binder under his arm. Not flowers, not soup, a binder. He said it was time to take the burden off my shoulders. "You're grieving," he told me. "You shouldn't have to deal with legal things right now." It sounded like compassion, but it felt like control. He asked for access to Margaret's files. He knew exactly where to look. Said he could talk to the insurance company, make sure the mortgage payments stayed on track, handle the deed transfer. It was all too fast, but I nodded. Because in grief, even betrayal can look like help. Then he asked for power of attorney. "Just until things settle," he said. I signed. At the time, I still believed trust was a virtue. I believed Margaret had raised someone who wouldn't hurt me. I believed blood wasn't the only thing that made a person family. At first, Daniel followed through. He paid the property tax. He called the probate office. He helped me refill my prescriptions. He even brought groceries, though he never stayed long. I remember thinking, maybe I'm just being paranoid. Maybe this is what support looks like now. But then he stopped staying for coffee. He stopped asking how I was. His visits became more like appointments, checklists to be completed, tasks to be delegated. And each time he left, a little more of the house seemed to leave with him. I noticed the framed photos of Margaret were missing from the hallway. "I'm digitizing them," he said when I asked. One of the old account books disappeared from the study drawer. "Paper's outdated," he said. Then one day, a letter arrived, addressed to him, not me. It was from the utility company. It named him the property manager. I hadn't died. I wasn't in a home. But already, my name was being written out of my own address. Still, I stayed quiet, until the night I went to bed and reached for my wedding ring on the nightstand, and it was gone. I always took it off before sleeping. Always. When I asked Daniel about it the next morning, he looked away. Said it probably fell behind the dresser. He never helped me look. I started paying closer attention. Daniel said he'd moved our joint account to a simpler setup. I asked which bank. He told me not to worry. He said Richard was still our family lawyer, but he started scheduling meetings without me. I'd ask what was said. He'd summarize in 2 sentences, always vague, always confident. That's when I began to feel it. This slow, invisible hand closing around everything Margaret and I had built. And so I started pretending I was more forgetful than I was, that my balance was worse than it really felt, that I was fading faster than I truly was. I needed to see what he would do when he thought I wasn't looking, what he would say when he thought I couldn't hear. The day of the meeting, Daniel told me to rest. "It's just housekeeping," he said. "Nothing for you to worry about." But he left the study door slightly open. He forgot I used to be a carpenter, that I notice hinges, that I read angles, that I remember the way sound travels in old houses with hollow doors. So I laid there in bed and listened. I listened to my stepson suggest to a lawyer that I was no longer fit to make decisions. I listened to him say I should be moved, that he was preparing things, that the will would need reviewing. I listened to him say those words without pause, like he'd rehearsed them, like they belonged to him. And in that moment, something changed. Not in the way that I aged, but in the way that I remembered who I was. I remembered the years I spent building this house with my hands, the nights I stayed up caring for Margaret when she couldn't sleep, the quiet dignity I had carried even as my body betrayed me. I wasn't weak. I wasn't confused. I was waiting. And now, the waiting was over. I would call Wallace in the morning. I would find the old documents. I would remind Daniel and the lawyer what it means to underestimate a man just because his hands shake. They thought I had no voice left, but I hadn't even begun to speak. The next morning, I didn't call Daniel. I called Wallace. He lived 3 houses down and had known me longer than Margaret had. A quiet man, widowed, sharp as ever. He used to work as a county notary and kept everything, stamps, seals, even legal templates, in a little fireproof box by his kitchen table. When I told him what I'd heard, he didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "I'm bringing my files." Wallace arrived before noon. He brought coffee, black, no sugar. I poured it into the chipped mug Margaret once used every morning. He opened his folder and started writing down dates as I spoke. Every account I remembered being closed, every document Daniel had taken, the missing ring, the changed utilities, the lawyer meeting, the phrase, acting property manager. He didn't flinch, just underlined things as I talked. When I was finished, he looked me in the eye and asked, "Do you want to revoke the power of attorney?" I said yes, and I meant it. We started with that. Wallace drafted a revocation form, and I signed it. My hand shook a little, but the signature was clear. I named Miriam as my new agent, my former neighbor, a retired nurse. Trustworthy, discreet, and not connected to Daniel in any way. Wallace notarized the change and made 3 copies. One for me, one for the records, and one for my new lawyer. Because I wasn't just going to take the power back. I was going to make sure Daniel never held it again. That evening, I found the old folder Margaret and I had labeled Estate Planning, Final. It had been tucked in the back of a drawer in the guest room, under blankets we hadn't used in years. Inside was the original will, our home deed, Margaret's trust paperwork, and a handwritten note she'd added in pen. "If anything changes, protect the house. We built it from scratch. We don't sell it. We pass it forward." I sat there reading her words as the sun sank behind the blinds. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I called a different attorney. Not Richard. Someone new. A man named Gerald Larkin, who Margaret and I had met at a charity dinner 3 years earlier. I remembered he had a soft spot for elder rights and handled contested wills. Wallace had his number. When I explained the situation, Gerald didn't sound surprised. "We get these calls more often than you'd think," he said. "Let's make things right." He came to the house the next afternoon. We reviewed everything. I showed him Wallace's notes, the revoked documents, Margaret's handwritten message. We talked for hours. When he left, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Not illusion, not pretense. Real control. We filed everything by the end of the week. A new will, a fresh power of attorney, new beneficiaries. The house would not go to Daniel. It would be placed in a living trust and eventually passed to a local foundation that supported working-class scholarship students, something Margaret had always wanted but never found the time to organize. I left a modest sum to Miriam, another to Wallace. The rest would be distributed through a grant program under Margaret's name. Daniel's name did not appear anywhere. Still, I didn't tell him. Not yet, because I wanted to see what came next, when a man believes he's already won. 2 days later, Daniel brought a stranger to the house, a woman in a blazer, carrying a clipboard and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is Glenn," he said. "She's with Senior Pathways. They evaluate homes for safety concerns and transition planning." She began inspecting the railings, taking photos of the stairwell, asking questions about medications and meals. I answered politely. She assumed I was confused. She called me sir 3 times in the tone of someone speaking to a child. Daniel followed behind her, silent, smug. I offered them tea. They declined. When they left, Daniel stood in the doorway a moment longer. "Things are moving quickly," he said. "We'll talk soon." Then he closed the door behind him, like he was sealing a chapter. That night, I reviewed everything with Gerald. He'd filed the updated will, sent formal notices to the probate office, and most importantly, submitted a legal statement to Richard Hayes, informing him that all prior authority Daniel once held was revoked. Any attempt to act on my behalf, financially, medically, or otherwise, would be challenged under state law, and every phone call, email, and withdrawal Daniel had made would be reviewed for misconduct. Still, Daniel didn't know what I knew. That was the gift he gave me, the ability to watch him fall into his own trap. The invitation came in a white envelope, hand-delivered, formal, stiff. It said, Mr. Daniel McAdams and attorney Richard Hayes request your presence at a private consultation to discuss the future management of your estate and medical care. They were still pretending I didn't understand what was happening. They wanted me to walk into that office like a frail old man, a box to be checked, a signature waiting to be collected. I wrote the date on the calendar, 3 days from now. Enough time to choose my clothes, gather my papers, and print 3 signed copies of the letter Gerald helped me draft. 1 for Daniel, 1 for Richard, and 1 for the record. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't need drama. I just wanted to speak the truth, in full, because I wasn't fading, I wasn't done, and I was never theirs to handle. I arrived 10 minutes early, wore the same brown suit Margaret once said made me look respectable but not trying too hard. It fit a little looser now, but I straightened the lapels myself. I didn't need Miriam to come in with me. She offered, but I told her to wait in the car. This was something I needed to do alone. The receptionist didn't recognize me at first. I could see it in her eyes, how she scanned my face as if trying to match it with a note from someone else. You're here for the 10 a.m.? She asked. I nodded. She buzzed the inner door and guided me to the same room I'd once sat in beside Margaret to sign our will. Back then, the air smelled like lemon polish and quiet confidence. Today, it smelled like someone had opened a window too late. Daniel was already seated, back straight, phone face down beside him. Richard Hayes, the lawyer, was shuffling papers. Neither of them looked up right away. When Daniel did, he smiled. It wasn't real. Jack, glad you made it. We've just been going over some options, nothing finalized, of course. Just making sure you're safe and everything's in order. I said nothing. I sat down slowly, placed my cane against the chair, and opened my own folder. Gerald had prepared everything. Richard started talking, carefully, like he was trying not to wake a sleeping dog. Jack, we're here today to ensure that your care and estate are being handled in a manner consistent with your best interest. Daniel has raised some concerns about your ability to manage certain tasks, and we think it's time to explore formal guardianship arrangements, along with a possible review of the existing will. I listened, quietly. Let them say what they needed to say. Daniel chimed in, softer than usual. This isn't about control. It's about making sure nothing falls through the cracks. You've been forgetful, and there've been a few safety issues. We just want what's best for you. He folded his hands like a priest at a funeral. I reached into my folder, took out a sealed envelope, and handed it to Richard. Before we continue, I said, I'd like this added to the official file. He opened it slowly, read the first few lines, then stopped. His face didn't shift, but his hands did. They stiffened. This is a notarized revocation of the power of attorney, he said, more to himself than to the room, dated 2 weeks ago. And a reassignment, a new will, new legal counsel. His eyes met mine. I no longer require your services, Mr. Hayes, I said. Daniel leaned forward. What is this? You're not thinking clearly, Jack. Looked at him, not unkindly. I heard every word you said the day you thought I was asleep. I heard how you planned to take the house, how you called me confused, how you said it was already done, and I let you believe that, because I wanted to see who you really were when no one was watching. He stood. This is outrageous. No, I said. It's binding, legal, and overdue. Richard looked down at the letter again. Everything appears in order. Your name is no longer authorized to act on Jack's behalf, and this firm will need to withdraw from all related proceedings immediately. Daniel stared at me, but I didn't look away. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, just a long, heavy pause between the man I had trusted and the man I had just dismantled. Finally, he turned and walked out. No goodbye, no apology, just footsteps retreating down the hall, faster than when he arrived. I turned back to Richard. You should review your intake process. People like him know exactly how to sound concerned when they're chasing something. He nodded once. Understood. I gathered my papers, placed them back into the folder, and stood. No one offered to help me. I didn't need them to. Outside, the air was warm and still. Miriam rolled down the window and waved. I climbed into her car, slowly but steadily. Did it go the way you wanted? She asked. I looked straight ahead. It went the way it needed to. The house felt different when we returned. Lighter, safer. I brewed tea and sat near the front window where the sun reached the hardwood. I thought about Margaret, about how much she had loved this place, about the quiet dignity she carried into every room. I walked down the hallway, past the empty nails where photos once hung. I would reprint them, frame them again, put them back exactly where she wanted them. The letter from Gerald sat on the desk, confirmation that the estate had been secured. The scholarship fund had been established. The home would never be sold. And Daniel, by law, would receive nothing. I never heard from him again. Sometimes, at night, I sit by the window and wonder if he tells people a different version of what happened. If he says I was bitter, confused, out of touch, let him. I have the documents. I have the dates. I have my name, still mine, written clearly on every page. I never wanted revenge, only to be seen for who I still was, and to remind someone who thought I couldn't speak that I still could.